Greetings everyone, Ben here from The Virtual Economist, and welcome to the third and final episode in my series on keys and refine. In the first episode, I talked about what has been happening to the price of keys, and in the second episode, I delved into how backpack.tf is affected by this problem. In this episode, I'm going to cover the topic that everybody has been anticipating, how Valve can solve this problem and reduce the cost of keys and refined. Alright, so let's get right on into it. First off, I think it is important to go over what wouldn't actually solve the problem. You see, having read countless comments on my past two videos, it seems like a lot of you guys have major misconceptions about how to actually approach this problem. This can be shown through two quote-unquote solutions that I see all too often in my comments section that unfortunately would do nothing to help at all. The first argument I hear is simply this: why doesn't Valve just add a crafting recipe in which refine can be crafted into keys? After all, if a key could be crafted from, say, 5 ref, wouldn't it automatically make keys worth 5 ref? Well, yes and no. You see, this solution would in fact make keys worth 5 ref, but it wouldn't fix the problem. In fact, this solution would most likely crash the entire economy and instantly put the value of all your items in jeopardy. Why is this? Well, like I've talked about extensively in past videos, the Team Fortress 2 economy relies heavily on the monetary stability of the key. So far, no matter how much refined keys have been worth, they've still had a stable monetary value of around $2.50. However, if a crafting recipe was added to the game, I fear that the key would no longer remain monetarily stable, uprooting the entire economy. Just think about it this way: if suddenly you could trade a bucket of sand for a flat screen TV, and assuming infinite TVs could be produced, suddenly literally everybody has the ability to own at least 20 TVs. The problem is, after the first few, you will probably struggle to find a use for any more TVs. I mean, if every wall in your house is already covered in bright, glossy displays, there really isn't much point to a 21st one. So what would you do? Well, if you're like most people, you would probably try to get rid of your excess TVs by listing them for sale. However, everyone else is going to be thinking the exact same thing, and it's only natural to expect people to start undercutting each other to the point where your TV is now as worthless as the bucket of sand was in the first place. While this is quite an extreme example, this concept is exactly what would happen with keys. If suddenly you could craft keys out of your useless metal, the market would suddenly be flooded with an insane amount of new keys, and undercutters on the Steam community market or on marketplace.tf would quickly lead to a lower and lower monetary value of the key. Of course, since the entire market is based on the stability of the key, RIP economy. So let's not do that. I'll go ahead and put that on the list of what not to do. The second common yet misguided idea is essentially this: why doesn't everybody just join together and start selling keys for refined metal? After all, if everybody continues to sell and sell and sell, the amount of refined in a key would have to go down. In essence, these people are arguing that if everybody started to sell keys instead of buying them, we could, as a community, pin the price of keys to a certain amount of refined. The problem with this, however, is twofold. Firstly, this strategy would be working against natural market trends. As I talked about in the first episode, keys are worth so much refined because the supply of refined is so high and its demand is so low. In order for this ploy to work, you would have to find a way to convince everybody to go against their common sense. Sure, you might be able to get a few of your friends on board, but convincing the entire community to start selling their stable keys for unstable, useless refined would be an incredibly hard, if not impossible, task to pull off. Nobody would want to take the risk, since if the scheme didn't work out, they would have just stupidly sold all of their keys for refined metal that they have absolutely no use for. Keep in mind, this was exactly why nobody could counteract the fall of the buds. Sure, traders everywhere tried to get people to buy buds instead of selling them, but it was basically impossible to convince people to go against the supply and demand trends. The second problem with this is much more logistical. As many traders have found out, your backpack size is actually quite small when it is filled with refined metal. If everybody sold all their keys for metal, they would quickly run out of backpack space. Even bot owners would have to make an almost infinite amount of bots to store this insane amount of refined metal that comes onto the market every single day. The sad thing is, even if every active trader and bot did this, I'm sure only a tiny microscopic fraction of the total amount of refined in existence would be removed from the market, and people would start to give up hope and just buy back their keys. So you might be thinking, what would actually work then? Well, if there's anything that we can learn from the two bad examples that I just addressed, it is that we need to let the economy recover naturally. Trying to convince people to go against market trends would do us no good in the long run, and trying to brute force the key to refined ratio is a recipe for disaster. So in order to let the market recover naturally, two things would need to be addressed in order to fix the inherent supply and demand problems that I outlined in the first video. Number one, since supply is too high for refined metal, a solution would need to find a way to reduce the amount of refined in circulation. Number two, since demand is very low for refined, a solution would need to find a way to increase the desirability of metal. Now, you might be thinking, what kind of solution would help us achieve both of these goals? Well, just like many of you guys have actually discussed, the solution is introducing what is called a ref sink. In essence, a ref sink is a place where users can throw away the refined metal to get some in-game benefit. For example, a user could pay 5 refined to get something back in the form of XP, items, or rewards. In concept, ref sinks help reduce the cost of keys in refined because they address both the inherent supply and demand problems of refined metal. When you chuck refined into a metal sink, the refined you used is deleted and it reduces the supply of refined. On the other hand, if the refined sink is good, it gives a brand new use for refined metal, increasing its demand. Now, I bet you're thinking, well, Ben, isn't crafting a ref sink, and how come it hasn't fixed the key to refined ratio already? Well, that is because crafting is what I like to call an ineffective refined sink. Yes, it is in fact a metal sink, but it doesn't actually affect the economy in the slightest. This is because crafting simply cannot be profitable in the long run. Sure, you can waste thousands of metal crafting new hats, but statistically there is no way that you can make more metal in hats than what you invested in the first place. So beyond YouTube videos, TF2's crafting system is a barren landscape. Now, I don't think that the crafting system is in all ways bad. In fact, I think it is a valuable lesson in how to actually design metal sinks. You see, Valve just adding more metal sinks to the game won't just magically fix the problem. In order to actually impact the key to refined ratio, Valve needs to somehow make an effective metal sink that impacts supply and demand enough that keys will actually go down in refined. So how do we actually make an effective metal sink? Well, to be honest, if there's any part of solving the key to refined problem that is the hardest to conceptualize, I would say it is certainly this. Out of all the metal sink suggestions I have seen in the comment section of my videos, on Reddit or on the backpack.tf forums, I can honestly say that only a tiny handful would actually do anything. Nonetheless, I still think that this issue can be solved. To do this, we need to lay out a framework that effective metal sinks should follow. To me, there are three main guidelines for creating an effective metal sink. Number 1, its use needs to be widespread. This is probably the most self-explanatory. An effective metal sink needs to be used by a large percentage of the player base. After all, if only a tiny niche of the community ever uses it, it's probably not going to have much effect on the economy as a whole. Number 2, refined sinks need to be used long after they are implemented. In essence, this has to deal with the economic concept of decreasing marginal utility. While I'm not going to delve into the technicalities here, applied to TF2, the concept is pretty simple. An effective metal sink cannot just operate in a boom and bust environment where huge numbers of people quickly lose interest in using the metal sink. Sure, this might seem obvious, but it honestly doesn't matter how many people use a new sink in the first week, because if people aren't going to be using it next month, the key to refined ratio really isn't going to change in the long run. Continued usage is a must to an effective metal sink. Number 3, metal sinks need to exist in an environment that prevents idlers and bots from taking advantage of the drop system. While this might seem a little bit unrelated to actual metal sinks, it is just as important to making them effective. You see, if a metal sink works well enough, the price of keys in refined should go down, and like I talked about in my last episode, this would in turn cause the monetary price of refined to increase. If this happens, the effectiveness of botting and idling slowly gets greater, causing more and more refined to be created instead of destroyed. In fact, this is something that Valve acknowledged themselves when well-known collector Jewlander asked them about ref sinks on a tour at Valve HQ. Fortunately, out of the three guidelines here, reducing idlers should actually be the easiest to conceptualize, and I will go ahead and talk about that in just a sec. Alright, so now that we have all of the information on the table, we can set out to quote-unquote solve the key to refined problem. Now, instead of posing one magic solution per se, I think it is best if I talk about three promising options Valve can take. After all, there are many solutions that fit the guidelines that I just talked about, and the more ideas that the community can generate, the greater the chance Valve will find one that they like and start to implement it into the real game. Alright, so let's get right on into them. Now, between all three solutions, I would take the same steps to prevent botting and idling in each one, so I figure I might as well talk about that first. Right now, weapon drops and consequently metal drops are tied to the time spent in game. This means it is easy for somebody to just log on and farm metal drops for days or weeks on end. To me, the solution seems obvious. Instead of trying to ban suspect bots, all Valve needs to do to solve the problem is to tie the amount of drops someone gets to time spent in casual and competitive. If somebody gets a certain amount of XP or plays a set number of comp games, they would be able to get a weapon drop, essentially making people play to actually get the medal. And if that isn't enough, Valve could always just rework the drop system from the bottom up, which, and this is new info, Julelander has confirmed the TF team has considered. Anyway, all methods aside, idling really shouldn't be the hardest issue to fix. Alright, so here's my first actual solution. Valve should add metal sinks that add brand new utilities paid for only with refined metal. By utilities, I mean the types of items or features that help you manage your backpack or items in it, similar to the backpack expander. You might not realize it at first, but there are actually a ton of features Valve could add to the game that could easily be tied to a neat metal sink. For example, who wouldn't want a tool that allows them to transfer paints from item to item? Or a tool that adds more craftable only strange parts? Or even a chest that allows you to store different items inside of it? To be honest, I would certainly pay metal to use some of these features. If Valve really wanted to jump on this idea, they could even make it so you would have to use metal to craft the item, or machine per se, that would allow you to craft the new utilities. For example, you might have to pay 10 ref to craft the machine that allows you to transfer paint from hat to hat at the cost of 5 ref apiece. Honestly, there are so many possibilities for more utilities that Valve could add, ones that I am sure the community would definitely use. I do think it's important to point out, however, that Valve would need to look at each utility thoroughly before adding it to the game. While some utilities like chests might seem harmless, adding a utility like an unusual effect transfer tool would be catastrophic to the well-being of the economy. Now, you may notice that I never said existing utilities should be made craftable, such as the aforementioned backpack expander. That is because I don't think that crafting or even pseudo-unboxing tradable items would actually do anything in the long run. You see, Valve could add a crafting recipe for gift wrap that is say 10 ref per item, and as long as it is cheaper than the market price, people would use it to create their own gift wrap. However, if people decide to sell the gift wrap instead of actually gifting items, a huge new influx of gift wrap would hit the market, and some people would soon be willing to sell it for far cheaper than 10 ref. If the gift wrap hits even 9.88 ref on backpack.tf, instantly nobody would ever use the in-game crafting recipe anymore, and we would be stuck with the exact same problem currently plaguing hat crafting. Sure, there are workarounds such as Valve lowering their price, but this problem would just make maintaining these types of metal sinks a pain in the long run. To be honest, for metal sinks to really work, they need to give players something in return that they cannot just list on the marketplace for lower. And that brings me to my next solution. My second idea would be for Valve to add a new set of 100% untradeable items that could drop as rewards for playing casual or competitive. Now, you're probably thinking, Ben, where's the ref sink in that? Well, it's actually built into this idea that also just happens to deliver something else that the community has been asking for. Anyway, ever since Meet Your Match dropped, one thing that many people have been frustrated with is the lack of a real incentive to play casual. Sure, it may have been mostly caused by that stupid coin cosmetic in the top left-hand corner, but I think that a lot of players, especially free-to-plays, would just love to get a few cosmetics so they don't have to look like the stereotypical Gibbous Pyrovision sniper that we all love to hate. Now, the whole reason this would be possible is because the items would be untradeable. If Valve tried to do this with tradable items, just giving away items to free-to-plays, the system would just be gamed by bots and idlers, which sucks for everyone involved. Alright, so here's a brief overview of how I think the system should be implemented. Valve could make a new type of item called the reward item and make a set of around 20 or so untradable cosmetics that would drop upon a player gaining a certain amount of XP in casual or competitive. Just like recent cases or crates, these items should be tiered, and before you guys freak out, there is a reason behind this, and it has to do with the much foreshadowed metal sink. Anyway, most of the time a player would get a mercenary or a commando grade item, which would allow them to get about half of the reward items right off the bat. However, if they wanted to get the rest, there would be a system that would allow players to exchange duplicate low tier items for the higher tier items that they don't have. In my view, this would be best implemented if you could exchange 3 mercenaries for a select commando, 3 commandos for a select assassin, and 3 assassins for a select elite. This means it would cost the equivalent of 3 mercenaries for a commando, 9 mercenaries for an assassin, and 27 mercenaries for an elite. On top of that, if a player received all 20 or so items, the game would start to drop strange versions of each item. Then, if the player collected all 20 or so strange items, collector's versions would drop. All this put together, a player would have to have a ton of playtime to grind out all the items to complete the full set. And here's where the genius of the ref sync comes in. If you're like most players, you probably won't be able to devote enough playtime to get every single item in the reward, strange, and collector's versions, assuming that these items are not collectible forever. So Valve could make each mercenary item craftable for maybe 1 to 3 refined. This way, players could use metal to get the other items that they really want without having to grind for hours on end. Since it would cost a ton of ref to get the elite grade items in the strange and collector's variants, players would destroy thousands of keys worth of ref to get these items, which would add a huge new demand for refined metal. If you're dubious as to whether this would work, this is exactly the system that Blizzard relies on in some of their major titles such as Heroes of the Storm, Hearthstone, and Overwatch. Sure, you can get most items just by grinding, but many people can and are willing to spend a little bit of their own money to get their favorite items faster. Speaking of Blizzard, this brings me to my final solution, the solution that I personally think is by far the best out of the 3 I'm going to talk about. That is, Valve should add a simple tournament system in which players can enter by paying refined metal. One thing I know from reading comments is that everybody, and I mean everyone, really enjoys MVM. While I doubt we'll ever see a new MVM update, I honestly think that this idea has the potential to be just as good. If you've ever played Blizzard's Hearthstone before, you're probably familiar with one of the game's core modes, Arena. In this game mode, a player pays 150 gold and then has to create or draft a deck of 30 cards by picking between 3 options for each slot. Then you play games with other players. If you win, you get a win, and if you lose, you get a loss. Then when you get to either 12 wins or 3 losses, your arena run is over, and you prize out based on your record. If you do well, you gain far more in rewards than 150 gold, and if you do bad, you get less than 150 gold. While TF2 would have to have a different implementation, I think that the idea of a tournament-style game mode like this would be pretty darn awesome. The devs could even set and change the game mode from time to time, so it could be 6v6, then maybe Highlander, or even MGE. The best part, however, is that people could enter the game with refined metal. Let's say you have a 1-game tournament in which the format is 6v6, and each player enters with 5 ref. This means that the prize pool consists of 12 times 5 or 60 ref. Now, in order to make this a sync, Valve would need to distribute less ref as prizing than it intakes. While sure, this might seem like blasphemy, keep in mind that this would just act like the house having a slight edge. For example, the house could take out 10 ref, reducing the prize pool to 50 refined. Then, if your team wins, you would get more than 5 refined back, and if you do bad, you would lose refined. For the best prize distribution, a simple algorithm could be developed to distribute metal based on how well you scored, and it could even drop craft hats or other cheap items to certain types of players. Also, keep in mind that if players wanted to play the game mode without actually paying ref, Valve could always just add a quote-unquote casual version of the game, where the entry cost was free and players didn't receive any rewards. So that is essentially how it would work. To be honest, I think that this would be the best solution for the main reason that it brings together all aspects of the community. I mean, just think about it. It rewards players for being good, so pub stompers, experienced casuals, and competitive veterans, pretty much anybody except for the friendly main, would enjoy the game mode since they could not only get the satisfaction of doing well, but also making a sweet profit. In addition, it would also invite these players to check out the trading side of the game, since people would need to be active in the market to buy or sell refined. And of course, this would absolutely demolish the key to refined ratio. As long as Valve finds a way to make the game mode fun and enjoyable, in the long run I could only imagine it becoming one of my favorites, if not my favorite way to play TF2. And there you have it. After this monster of a series, you finally have my take on how Valve could reduce the cost of keys in Refined and finally put an end to this era of 30 ref keys. I hope you guys really did enjoy it because these videos took a god-awful amount of time to write, record, edit, and produce. And until next time guys, thanks for watching.